Good evening and welcome to episode 102 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast. We're back. I hope you're all well rested. You stayed home, you stayed safe, you were sanitizing, social distancing, and of course you caught up with the developer show over the weekend with Chad, as well as the first time home buyers show on Friday evening. Well, it is a Monday, and of course, it is the Private Property Podcast. And this evening, we're going to be looking at auction versus conventional property sales. We're essentially going to look at, the difference between the two and dive deeper into, I'll say, the pros and cons of buying via auction, and even get a sense of the future of where auctions are going. We've certainly seen a lot of digital auctions happening. I've seen some of the auction houses posting some of the auctions on their Facebook pages, and a lot of people were commenting and asking, is this how auctions are actually run? Because so many people just hadn't been inside an auction house or seen a real live auction taking place. And of course, if you're interested in ever getting that first deal via an auction, or perhaps maybe it's not even the first deal, it might be a couple of deals that you've done before, but you're now exploring getting one via an auction. We're also going to be looking at tips for buyers who are looking to buy their properties via an auction. I know a lot of the guests that we've had here, especially those who are property investors and coaches, have said that they found a lot of their really good deals via auction. So we're getting those really good tips of what you should be looking out for if you want to buy your property on auction. From you at home, I definitely want to hear from you. If you've ever bought in an auction, how was the experience? Was it something, did it go the way that you expected to? What were some of the things that you picked up that you definitely did not anticipate? And if you've never bought via an auction, what's stopping you? Maybe you're a bit scared, perhaps you don't know much about it. What is the thing that you still need to learn in order for you to be able to buy that property via an auction? Well, that's it. Certainly what you can expect on this evening's menu. And to help us better understand auctions and versus, the conventional way that we've been buying property, I'm joined this evening by Hein, who is the MD of Into Assets. Hein, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zama. Thank you for the invitation.
Hein, I think before we even look at some of the tips and the trends of where auctions are headed, perhaps let's just look at the top level sort of difference between buying a property via auction and buying it kind of the conventional route.
Yeah, Zama, there are quite a few differences. I there will be. I will be explaining some advantages also, because it's a very open and transparent platform. It's not like where you go to a conventional estate agent and you look what's on the books. We work on a sole mandate for any property, and I just want to differentiate also that we're more in the commercial, industrial, and agricultural space. So I don't see me as an authority on the residential area, although we do some residential sales also. But it's very much a done deal when you buy a property on the auction. It's not subject to approval of loans or any other suspensive conditions. So if you go to auction, you pay in terms of our contract, you pay a 5% deposit. The commission is payable by the buyer, which is also quite different than the conventional estate agent. And it's a very swift process. From the date of the mandate, the auction happens in about 3 to 4 weeks. Guarantees have to be delivered in 45 days. And there's no disclosed reserve price, which I think it's quite a big difference between an auction and a conventional sale. Is not the property, X property is in the market for, say, 10 million rand. That reserve price is not always disclosed. We also don't always go with the opening bid, so we leave it to the market to decide on the day of the auction what they're prepared to pay.
And Hein, you've mentioned a few, I'll say, technical words or jargon that perhaps some viewers at home might not be particularly familiar with. I want you to just do a quick explainer on what that opening bid is. As you were mentioning that certainly the way that Into Assets works is they typically don't put an opening bid, where we know that some auction houses do. Of course, many actually don't put that opening bid up when they put together that pack. And you also mentioned that you typically don't show what the reserve price is. Perhaps explain to our viewers at home, what an opening bid is and what the reserve price essentially is.
Yeah, I think, as I said, we normally don't work on that opening bid, but I think why people or other of my colleagues are using it is they want to limit your serious buyers up to a certain level. So you don't want a 10 million rand property, and then there are people in the market expecting to pay 2 million rand for it. So you rather eliminate some of the people and rather put them in people that they know that this property will not be sold below 10 million rand. But you're quite fixed to that. I mean, if you have that opening bid should start there. We like to keep it open to the people themselves, and then the auctioneer controls the whole process. So what also happens, and I think I've mentioned it to you, is that some people, a property, for instance, has been in the market for a long time with estate agents at, again, at say a price of 10 million rand, and the reserve price is dropped by the seller. Then we will use that as an opening bid to have an indication to the market that the seller is now prepared to drop his price. Because people in the market is clever. They know a property and they know how long they've been in the market, and they know for what price they've been in the market. So if you want to go and it hasn't been sold through an estate agent, we don't have all that ability to just go to auction and get more than 10 million rand, where the estate agents have also tried to do that for some time.
And you know, Hein, I actually like the fact that you mentioned that people are clever, right, when it comes to figuring out how long a property has been on the market and the relative price point that it should be, because it certainly is one of the tips that we give to our viewers at home, that one of the things that you want to do when you're looking to buy a property and you've already identified the specific area, perhaps even the property type, is to already create that alert. The private property website certainly has that feature where you can create an alert. So you're looking for, let's say, a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment, and you want it to have 2 bathrooms. These are the areas that you're looking for, and they'll be able to send you alerts every time a new property in that area is put on the website. The moment the price goes down in that area, you're also able to get alert. And I think that kind of effort from the buyer also means that as a seller, you need to be clear about your price point, because you're not going to suddenly BS the buyers, because they know what is out there on the market. Gone are the days when they don't have some of this data easily accessible. They're able to get the reports, to get a sense of even other properties in the area that were registered, what the relative price is. And I think it's such a great place for us to be able to be in, where a buyer is more informed. And so by the time they make that offer, whether it's on auction or they're signing that OTP, the conventional route, they know that they've made a very well-informed choice, as opposed to the days when it was relatively secretive where some of these prices are, and buyers weren't as, I'll say, plugged in or didn't know as much. So Hein, I think I want us to look a little bit into the future of auctions, because one of the things that I noticed, and I was saying this earlier, is we saw that the moment we had, lockdown, we're in level 5, so we knew that we couldn't, of course, view any properties. And for a certain period, the property market kind of stood still. These offices were closed. But as obviously the restrictions became less and less, we saw a lot of the auction houses hosting more and more digital auctions. And some, I think, were kind of lagging behind, only starting those digital auctions now. What would you say is kind of where you're seeing the future of auctions going? Is this something that we're going to be seeing more and more of in terms of the auction, process, or once sort of relative normal life resumes, we're going to kind of go back to doing it sort of the old-fashioned way?
Yeah, Zama, I definitely think the online auction and technology is here to stay. I think a lot of people, or a lot of auctioneering companies, did not have the technology, and the lockdown was actually like an indication that if you don't move fast and get online facilities, you're going to fall behind. And I can see also a lot of the auctioneering companies has acquired all the technology to do this kind of auctions. We were lucky that in January, we acquired all our online auctions, and we could immediately, I think our first auction was about 14 days after the first of the level 5 lockdown. So we were quite quickly, and some of the other auctioneering companies also. I do not say that the conventional way of an open and a live auctioneer by an auctioneer is something of the past. We definitely prefer that still. but we like the added online facility so that people can watch. We are, according to our technology, you can sit on your mobile phone. You can sit in London and you can bid lively and simultaneously with the auction that's happening wherever we conduct that auction. So yeah, I think it's more just an addition to the conventional way. We prefer still the conventional way, but online auctions and technology is definitely be something for the future. I think more properties will be sold on that way also, and which is good for the industry.
And I actually quite like that, Hein, the fact that we're now increasingly going to have options. So in the event where you want to, as you say, certainly bid from the comfort of your home or perhaps physically go there, we now have that option, and more auction houses are essentially offering that as a service. I see we've got a few new time viewers at home. Rafio, I see you saying that it's the first time that you're watching. Nicolo Tabete saying also that it's her first time watching. Welcome to the Private Property Podcast. We hope that you'll be joining us and also catching up on some of the incredible episodes that you have missed. Of course, if there's any episode that you want to catch up on, it is available here on our social media platforms as well as on our YouTube channel. So do go back and catch up with some of them. And I think, to go to some of the questions and comments from the viewers at home, Hein, we've got here from one of our regular viewers, Ngateko Achabe, who says, I'm so scared of auctions. I don't want to find myself buying a house and people refuse to move out. I understand I have limited information. I hope from tonight I'll be able to be in a better position to make an informed decision. And I guess, Hein, that's one of the reservations that people typically tend to have when it comes to particularly residential auctions, and sometimes even some of the commercial ones where you're buying a block of flats and you know that it's already occupied. And so you're probably going to have to deal with evicting, people who've potentially taken over the building. Perhaps what are some of the other fears you've picked up, buyers typically tend to have when they are about to, buy on auction?
Yeah, I think, as I think I told you earlier also, I think people, in particular in the residential market, who are not experienced property buyers and investors, might feel a little bit intimidated by an auction, which should not happen. I also do think that people still have the perception that if they go to auction, it's like a sheriff auction, where you hit by a lot of things you did not expect, like you had perhaps to pay rates and taxes, which is arrears. You didn't know that, you didn't do your homework. So firstly, if you're well prepared and you have a proper due diligence done on the property, there's absolutely no way you should be scared to go to an auction. But you have to realize you have to do your due diligence. You have to look at the property, see whether there are defects, see what the terms and conditions of the auctioneer, because it differs from auctioneer to auctioneer. You have to realize that you have to have your finance or pre-approval in place. So if you've done all of that, there's really no way why it should be so much different than a normal conventional sale.
And another comment here coming in from Umatha Shingane, who says, I'm hoping to try this mode of buying after a friend got an unbelievably good deal on a property. It sounds less intimidating than what I thought it was too. And I think that's also one of the things, Hein, I think particularly when it comes to, residential auctions, is that people are intimidated by it because you simply just don't know, how it works, what the process is. And as you were saying, that sometimes not understanding what the terms and conditions are makes it even more intimidating. So it's so easy for people to sometimes opt to not go down that route, whether it's selling their property that way or buying a property that way, because they simply don't have the right information.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk on behalf of all the auctioneers. We're quite friendly people. You can always talk to us prior to the auction. We're not intimidating people. We have like a proper due diligence tax on every single property. We allow your normal viewing to go and look at a property. And it's such a transparent and open public event, actually, that there's no hidden factors. Everything has to be very open and transparent in terms of an auction, which actually should be less intimidating for a buyer because they know everything is in the open and you can't hide away from anything.
And if anything, that's probably the first tip. We'll be getting more tips later on in the show. That's certainly the first tip to viewers at home, is to ask questions of the auction house that you potentially want to go buy at, or perhaps even sell at. As Hein is pointing out, they are relatively friendly people, and this is the time where a lot of people within the property space are relatively accessible and are aware that people have more and more interest, or a bigger interest in property. So if you have any questions, even for the auction house itself, I think this is the opportunity for you to do that. And on the issue of questions, we'll be taking your questions and comments after this short break. Of course, I want to hear from you. If you've ever bought from an auction house before, how was the experience? Was there something that happened that completely threw you off or was very unexpected? And what was that particular thing? And if you're still undecided about going the auction route, what are some of your reservations about going down that road? We'll be taking more of your questions and comments just after this. Welcome back to episode 102 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This evening, we're looking at auction versus conventional property sales. We're looking at and focusing primarily on auctions, because I think we spend quite a significant amount of time here on the Private Property Podcast looking at sort of the conventional sales, understanding things like, negotiating the price well with your estate agent, viewing various properties. And we don't always look at the option of the auction route, rather. And I think this is one of those options that a lot of people are now slowly being opened up to. One of the opportunities that this COVID-19 crisis has opened up is we're seeing more and more auction houses going online, and the ability to be able to do auctions on digital platforms or digitally, really. I think one of the things that I picked up, and this was pre-lockdown and pre-COVID, was even being able to bid via WhatsApp. I think one of the auction houses launched that, and it was mostly, I think, their residential properties, so you were able to even bid via WhatsApp, which I found to be quite an interesting way of using an app that we basically use on a daily basis to be able to tap into people who are potentially interested in that. We're, of course, also taking your comments and questions at home. If you've ever gone the auction route, I definitely want to hear about your experience and any tips that you'd like to share with our viewers at home as we continue the conversation on our social media platforms. I see Martha saying, I didn't know that you can sell your property at an auction. I thought it was only for repossessed properties. We learn every day. And that's one of the very big misconceptions. I mean, if you're a property seller, you're able to approach an auction house for them to essentially sell your property, as opposed to working with an estate agent. So it isn't only properties that have been repossessed that get sold that way. A question, Hein, that we've got here is coming from Tembelani, who's asking us on YouTube, and he's asking, what are the other costs that are associated with buying from an auction that you don't pay when buying from a private sale or from an estate agent?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and a good question. It differs from auctioneers to auctioneers. In terms of our auctions, there's a 10% commission payable by the buyer. So it's very different from a seller, where the seller pays a commission in terms of traditional transactions. Some auctioneering houses are working on lower commissions. There's also a difference between if it's like a residential or it's a commercial property. The rates are differing from case by case. Then there's also, if you're a seller, there's a marketing cost that has to be paid. But I think the gentleman is asking in respect of, as a buyer, the terms and conditions is so important, and the brochure of the auctioneer is that the people must know what they're paying. And as I've mentioned just now, that sometimes the buyer has to pay their outstanding rates and taxes at a certain point, and that can be extremely onerous if you didn't do your homework prior to the auction. So I think the simple way to be well informed and to be prepared is to engage with the auctioneer. and tell him what is the commission, who pays the commission, are there any outstanding issues which are not disclosed, is this the only amount that I will be paying? And the people factor that into the bid price at the day of the auction. If they have to pay the commission, you want to pay 10 Rand for a property, then you will bid to 9 Rand to facilitate for that extra commission also. But very important that you have to do your homework before you go to an auction.
And I think, Hein, I think one of the big things is as you're saying, I think one of the big differences, of course, with auction is it's not as, I'll say, linear or straightforward as the conventional route in terms of dealing, because we'll say the rules slightly differ depending on which auction houses you opt for, or which auction houses is selling a particular property. It becomes so important that you don't use the rules from kind of one auction house and think that that's the same for each and every auction house. So even as you're going to different auctions, they very likely won't be from the same auction house. So familiarizing yourself with the particular auction house that you're dealing with and what those rules are and who pays for what in that property transaction becomes so important, as Hein is saying. And it's essentially part of the due diligence that you're going to be doing as you are either buying or selling your property via auction. Now, Hein, I know a lot of viewers at home, and one of our viewers is even saying it earlier, that there are people who tend to get quite a lot of bargains when they buy via auction, and to the point where there's this, I don't even want to say it's a misconception, but there's certainly the sentiment that if you want to get really good value for your money, you want to buy at an auction, because that's where you're able to, get a property at a relatively lower price than what you would typically buy if you were just working with an estate agent. And I think that's some of the probably reasons why I'm seeing more and more people being interested in going the auction route. And I can also imagine that our viewers at home are thinking, look, this is probably the way to go for me to explore in terms of perhaps growing your property portfolio, or even maybe buying in order for you to be able to flip. We've got a question here coming in from Howard Makatsane, who says, so this is an auction different from the sheriff's auction? And if so, what are the differences? Do they work in the same manner? Does the sheriff's auction also do the same due diligence as other auctions?
Yeah, sheriff auctions are totally different. And that's what I said to you just now, that the perception is still in the market that your private auctions and your sheriff auctions are the same. It's quite different. I mean, the sheriff auction takes place in terms of a court order. There's already judgment against it, and normally it has to be sold without any reserve of the property, compared to where the seller in a private property at a private auction has the condition in that it is subject to his confirmation after the auction. So that leisure the seller does not have, because there's already judgment taken against him, and one of the secured creditors will be driving that force. So there it can happen that a property can be valued at 10 million Rand and can be sold for 6 million Rand, for instance. Mm-hmm. So it's very different because there's no reserve, and as I said, the terms and conditions of a sale and execution may sometimes be very onerous as far as outstanding costs and stuff are. And it's also like a normal auction. People must realize that you have to pay this. The auction is a conclusive transaction. You cannot go and pay a deposit on the auction and then later say, I can't get a loan on this property. Either whether it's a sheriff auction or a private auction, your finances simply have to be in place. Mm. And Otherwise, you might lose your deposit and all other costs that you've paid. You can't come up with a balance of the purchase price. It's very important that you have your ducks in a row.
And Hein, I've actually seen a few of those instances where some of the property investors obviously go to auctions to get really good deals. Some of them perhaps had a plan of, I'm only going to bid on these properties, and sometimes whether they are getting too enthusiastic, they bid on a particular property, and one of the investors that was going to make up, we'll say, another portion of that property suddenly pulls out, and you're now short of, let's say, 300,000 on a property that you wanted to buy. It's a good investment, and you've now got investors essentially trying to raise that 300,000 because they understand the financial implications of them not raising the funds essentially to be able to conclude the transaction. And oftentimes a lot of them want that property because they've already factored it in. They're thinking this is a good asset to actually get. And they've run their numbers in terms of what they're potentially going to get from that asset. Hein, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I know that into assets deals a lot with your commercial buildings, your agriculture and industrial buildings, and perhaps when you look at commercial buildings, especially if you look at your more sort of blocks of flats as opposed to office buildings, because I know that some of the viewers at home have a particular interest in buying blocks of flats. And we've already spoken about different ways of trying to perhaps access financing, whether from your TAF or conventional, some of the conventional financial institutions. Perhaps sort of top level, some of the tips that you'd want to share with people who want to buy sort of their first block of flats, because I think oftentimes you do go, I've even you'd search various auction houses to see what blocks of flats are available. There are various questions that you ask them, and perhaps now you kind of want to get a better sense of what should you be doing better before you kind of participate even on the online auction on the into assets or even other auction houses. So what tips would you share for people who are looking particularly at blocks of flats?
I think the most important will be that any buyer of any kind of property that they want to buy is they have to do a proper due diligence on that property. Like if you buy a block of flats, you must see whether the lease agreements are in place, whether the deposits are paid, whether there are not a lot of arrears on rental, which is not disclosed. So you have to do all the auctioneers, most of the auctioneers have a very proper, prepared and a comprehensive bidder's pack that you can get all those details in. But you have to make sure that you know everything and do your calculations, get advice from your bankers or whatever, respect of value. If you do not know, you have to be very well informed if you attend an auction. If you're not informed, it might bite you later. So very important to have a proper due diligence and see that you have your finances in place and that you are in a position to pay the price equal to the highest bid you're prepared to pay at the auction.
And Hein, I think the final tip, but now from a seller's perspective, I know viewers at home have now just learned that you're able to do a private auction. So the auction isn't only for the sheriff's auction, as many people typically tend to think. And I think I can even see that Shakong is saying here, I've always associated auctions with someone losing a home or a family torn apart, and as such I made a decision not to consider buying at an auction. I suppose these are sheriff's auctions. And of course, Shakong, that is the difference between sort of the private auction and the sheriff's auction, that there are sellers who sometimes go straight to an auction house in order to sell their property. So Hein, any tips for a seller looking to sell their property that route? Because I think a lot of people are now even learning that, you can actually sell your property that route as opposed to working with an estate agent and having it listed sort of the normal conventional way. Any tips you'd like to share for sellers when working with auction houses?
Yeah, I might repeat myself, but the biggest tip or the benefit for a seller is the fact that an auction is really the real deal. It's a conclusive transaction. You sign a mandate, within 4 weeks your property is on auction. It's open, it's transparent, there's live bidding of the property. You don't have to disclose your reserve price. You might get more than what you wanted for the property. The auction is really, to me, is the barometer of what the market is prepared to pay for it. And then on that day, it's not open for lengthy discussions and negotiations between a seller and a buyer. It goes to the auction, sellers are there, they screen, they know what to pay for it, they pay the deposits on the day of the auction, not suspensive to any transactions. So there's really a variety of reasons in favor of a seller. And the auction terms is always on the seller's terms. If you want to say that occupation can only be in a year's time after the auction, then you can stipulate that in the contract. It's not open for negotiation. And then obviously the seller doesn't pay the commission in terms of our rules of auction. Just in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's definitely coming out even from viewers at home is that we're definitely going to do more episodes focusing on auctions and understanding auctions better. Whether you want to buy a property on auction, what you should be looking out for. We've been talking a lot about due diligence when it comes to auctions. We'll be unpacking what exactly do we mean by doing your due diligence when it comes to buying a property in auction, but also selling your property in auction. Because as I can see, a lot of viewers at home weren't aware that you're able to, sell your property in that way, but thinking that auctions were predominantly or primarily only auctions, sheriff's auctions rather. So I already promise you that we're going to be looking at auctions and understanding how to do auctions, better, so that if you want to go down this route, you are better equipped to be able to make the right decision. Hein, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Zama.
And that is Hein, who is the MD of Into Assets. And that, of course, brings us to an end of this evening's conversation. And as promised, we will be looking at auctions in the coming weeks and understanding how auctions work, how to do the due diligence, what do we even mean by due diligence, and making sure that if you want to go the auction route, you are better equipped to be able to handle, that decision and also that transaction. Well, folks, that's it from me here on the Private Property Podcast. It has been a pleasure to be with you. We are, of course, back again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. talking all things property. And I want us to keep the conversation going right here on our social media platforms. So if you've ever, of course, participated or bought rather your property via an auction, do share with our viewers and, the community at large, how you found the whole transaction. What were some of the things that really stood out for you? And if you're now looking to, go the auction route and perhaps have a few reservations, what are some of the reservations that you have about this process? Let's get the conversation, continuing on our social media platforms. And of course, we're back again with you tomorrow evening. And as usual, hoping that you're staying home and staying safe. Welcome to the first edition of the Private Property Podcast. As usual, we'll be bringing you experts to help us navigate this COVID-19 crisis, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, or somebody perhaps even looking to get into the property market and don't understand how this crisis is actually going to affect your property journey.
Yes, we certainly do find ourselves in very, very interesting and very unique times.
What I found in my experience that in terms of buying repossessed property, I've had a lot of my wins because of easy sales.
So you want to have good credit on your credit profile. You definitely don't want to have no credit profile on your credit profile. This is what we determine as a thin credit file.
Accrued value during the course of the marriage will have to share with the other spouse, depending on what their contract says, the assets they gain during the course of the marriage. So that's basically what it means.
We are profiling young people in property. You all know how excited I am to talk about property, but I even get more excited when I talk to my peers.
Millennials and young professionals are money conscious. We understand that money doesn't grow on trees, and so we're trying to find ways to accommodate ourselves.
Who are the parties in the buying and selling process, right? So you have the buyer, you have the seller, you have the bank, and you have an estate agent.
Good evening and welcome to episode 66 of the Private Property Podcast.
Probably top of the list when you're sourcing a new tenant is that word of a credit check. Very, very, very important. That's your starting point.
You want to create a savings buffer for you to be able to look at investments that are longer term.
Those contracts, those offer to purchase have been drafted by legion of lawyers, and I can make fun of lawyers because my wife is a lawyer, okay? So.
Welcome to episode 80 of the Private Property Podcast.
Out of everything we've discussed tonight, I think your managing agent is critical because they're the custodian of the relationship. They're the ones that are managing the affair.
We are there to analyze a market and to look at the behavior of buyers and sellers in the market.
Be able to market yourself because in essence, real estate and as an agent, it is you that we first buy before we buy the company that you're with.
Hi, I'm Khumutsapoe, and I'm an entrepreneur from Soweto. Soweto's come a long way, from a small township to a mini city of its own. Soweto's got some really, really nice suburbs, like Diepkloof Extension, but the locals call it Diepkloof Expensive. Orlando is known as the suburb that had the first brick houses built in Soweto. Orlando Stadium for its iconic games between Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates. And most importantly, Vilakazi Street, where Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu resided. To the west of Soweto, you find suburbs of Dobsonville and Protea. These two suburbs are actually very cosmopolitan, fresh, young, and very new. Right next door to Soweto, we have a neighboring suburb, which is Eldorado Park. For a little adventure and a little fun, Soweto's got so many night spots, from the News Cafe at Mamponya Mall, to your Vilakazi Streets at Kumzi's, to just chilling at Chafpozi just between the towers and having a simple braai vleis chisanyama. Something very close to my heart is actually seeing people move back into Soweto, growing businesses, remodeling homes. It merely says to us that Soweto is a growing city. There's way more to this place than what we think. Soweto needs to be discovered daily. I'm so proud to call Soweto my home, and this is my neighborhood.